Hi, welcome. Afternoon, everyone. So my name's Gary Blake. I'm a senior staff solutions architect here at VMware. Been with the organization for 13 years. I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about validated solutions. Over to my colleague.
Yeah, Chris Ingalls, manage the VMware Cloud Foundation solution architecture team. I've been doing this kind of validated design solution work through all of our transitions for Gary here for about a decade. So some of you may have seen us before, some of you may have heard this before, some of you may be familiar with what we're going to talk about here today. So anyway, thank you all for coming, appreciate it, and we'll dive right in, yeah?
Yep.
So obviously, nobody here has seen this slide before. It'll be brand new to everybody. So we'll spend our minute on that and then carry on. But anyway, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about VMware Cloud Foundation validated designs, all right? We're going to talk about VMware Cloud Foundation validated solutions, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of our automation extensions and open source projects related to the work that we do here. Now, show of hands, how many people here are familiar with the term VMware validated designs?
Awesome.
All right, explains why you're here. What about VMware validated solutions? Okay, right, there we go. This is why we're bringing validated designs back, because these things are really intertwined. So, okay, so we'll talk first here about validated designs. So, we had a problem to solve as VMware when we were talking to all of our customers about cloud, about SDDC, about public cloud, hybrid cloud, and now we're talking to you about private cloud with a public cloud experience, right? But of course, in our product set, there are a lot of different configuration combinations, a lot of different ways to do everything that it is that you can possibly do with our product set. And we would always have these conversations about permutations, the snowflake customer deployments, unicorns, right? The ones who are trying to do something that nobody else is doing. But really a lot of it came down to, for us, it's like, how do we navigate customers' non-negotiables, right? And so when we built the validated designs, we built it a certain way with a certain set of design objectives that was really meant for as many of our customers as possible, right? We're trying to drive adoption of the SDDC at the time, and then ultimately, as we've continued to evolve, we've continued to bring that same sort of mindset to this. But what we hear from you is we want what we're deploying to follow best practices, right? And we also don't want to be unique, right? But make it easy for us to actually deploy and operate and maintain. And again, as we've kind of pointed out, we've been doing this for a while. We know this can be done. And if you want to get some funny stories about it or the history, you can either ask us after or wait for the book. It'll be a burner. But as I said, every customer presents us with something that's somewhat unique, right? And with the VVD, when we would engage with customers or train our field and partners, we would say, look, what you want to do is you want to approach it with flexibility where we're maintaining the principles of design and how it's tested, but you want to go to where we've got some flexibility on the product side. A perfect example with cloud providers, right? The validated design would be using external PSCs in a ring for a single SSO domain across two regions of your SDDC, right? Cloud providers wanted to remove the workload vCenters, right, from that SSO ring because that was actually tenant space, so it didn't need to be shared with their backend management system. And we said, perfectly supported by vSphere, off you go. We haven't got guidance for you for that though, right? So you'll have to do that piece yourself. A lot of what we're doing now are those things that we had as friction for adopting the solution. We're introducing those as part of what we're doing now with Cloud Foundation. But again, one of the things we're trying to do here is avoid doing everything because we don't want too many permutations. We want this to be prescriptive and we want you all to be successful in deploying and operating your environments, your clouds as they were. So VMware Cloud Foundation validated designs. Welcome back. It's a collection of prescriptive best practice-based design patterns for implementing Cloud Foundation for any environment and any use case. And so, what are we doing? Well, we're answering your question. Tell us how to be successful as we build and operate our private cloud. Okay, so obviously we're taking the components of VMware Cloud Foundation and presenting them in ways that are consumable through infrastructure as code, also both in a standardized set of patterns that are both scalable and secure, right? So, what is it that you need out of your environment? What fits your scalability requirements, and so on and so forth from there. Now, ultimately, what we've always been driven at here is how are we reducing the time to which you're getting value out of your investment in the platform, right? Early on, we would always be dealing with situations where our services or partner teams were trying to decipher this for themselves. There'd be long-running engagements to get customers up and running. We're trying to get this up and running operational with you as soon as possible. And there are a lot of different ways we're working to achieve that in product, but then also through these design patterns. Secure by design, and as always, compliance ready, right? We continue to churn on what we're doing from compliance and regulatory solution standpoint. We're not going to cover that too much today, but if anybody has questions on that front after the fact, happy to get into that. But as always, and there's another story here, it evolves with the product, right? And so one of the things that changed from a VMware validated design perspective is that those design patterns ended up being implemented in Cloud Foundation, the product itself. Right, and that took a real big turn around VCF3, and we took a turn to really just build design around VCF, right? And so we're sort of doing this as a little bit of a, hey, we've got a bunch of stuff that we're doing that's kind of on this VMware validated, VCF validated track that we know a lot of our customers are familiar with. So we want to tap into that as we sort of help you understand and navigate what we're doing VCF9 and going forward. Okay. So we'll start with architecture models. Show of hands, who's familiar with what we describe as a standard architecture model? Okay, who's familiar with the differences between a standard architecture model and a consolidated model? Okay, great. So one thing we've had to do, right, from a design perspective is make sure that we're helping customers who do have a need for small footprint deployment for whatever reason, right? And so we've tried to make sure we're covering design patterns that are in that consolidated range, but for a variety of different use cases. Even in the case where we introduced import capability for VCF 5.2, right? And part of that import capability allows for the vCenter to run co-resident and workload in a new workload domain that's been imported, right? We consider that a consolidated architecture model, right? Management co-located, coexistent in capacity with workload, right? So that's an example of a consolidated architecture model, right? Standard model really is separation, isolation of your management from workload space, right? Management plane from data plane, right? Why? Well, this is why we always are recommending, right? Not requiring, recommending that people sort of align to a standard architecture model. It's because it really does check more boxes for you from the start, right? So we're talking about isolating operations from a manageability perspective, right? Separation of maintenance windows, like let's take care of management and then let's come back to our workloads, right? So, basically you're not trying to do the whole enchilada at once. Again, different issues, different factors you got to deal with at scale, but it is what it is. Security, compliance, availability, recoverability, same thing, right? Being able to separate, isolate, recover, troubleshoot, right, within a specific context, right, is really a more efficient way to operate, especially if you've got a large scale private cloud. And then performance and scalability, a big thing here is like, let's leave the management structure, the management components of our stack out of the mix. We can all talk about what needs to happen and what needs to be improved in terms of our stack and how much it consumes from a hardware infrastructure standpoint, but let's not have that interfere with how we scale out our environment, right? And let's definitely not have it interfere with the performance of our workload for our end users, tenants, lines of business, what have you. Okay, so getting into a little bit of how we're constructing this now, you may see, anyway, what we're going to talk about here really is really workload domain types, clusters, hosts, and racks, networking, operating models, but really it's the topologies you see across the bottom here, right? So those of you that remember the VVD, you'll see this multi-instance, multi-availability zone construct sort of at the bottom right. That is really what we were presenting in the VVD, where we would call it multi-region, multi-zone, right? And we were trying to align very much to what we were seeing in public cloud space. We refer to it right now as multi-instance because for each of these instances, you're talking about a dedicated VCF deployment and SDDC manager boundary, right? May that change in the future? Sure, I would love for it to. But anyway, we may revise terminology on this as we go. But then you see we're talking about also, sort of different topologies that we see across some of the customer set. And so what we would do with the VVD is we'd start all the way at multi-instance and multi-availability zone. We'd say, hey, stop where it makes sense for you to stop, right? Like where you've met your availability targets, your reliability targets, what have you, stop there, right? Now, we'll get into how workload domain types can be selected and mapped into each of these topologies, how, the layout of clusters, your hosts, and how you lay them out across racks can factor into these different topologies, and then the different networking models that are available and how those ultimately factor into the different design patterns that we have. So you see here on the bottom right, we're talking about single instance, single availability zone. Well, within that topology, you can have multiple different patterns you can stitch together based on your needs and availability requirements, security requirements, right? Now, I say here, hey, can you find the patterns that repeat? I'm not sure that that's still got big enough in the room, but the idea here is that, you can see you've got management clusters that are deployed within a rack. You can see you've got management clusters that are deployed across racks, right? You can see the same thing for workload domains, right? And you can see that we've even got stuff in here for dedicated NSX edge, where you may be using a vSAN cluster, which requires 3 nodes per rack, as you spread that out across depending on your NSX requirements, or VCF networking, as we should be saying now. Slides need updating. But also if you were going to use NFS, right, NFS storage to back that. These are the kind of things we're going to introduce as patterns that could be used within the topologies that we talked about on the previous slide. And so, as an example, how do we then look at that across different topologies? So in this example, we're talking about management domain resiliency, right? And so on the far left here, we've got a situation where we're talking about a single cloud instance, right? A single zone, and we've got a rack resilient management cluster, right? And then in the middle, okay, and what's the issue there, right? Let's talk about that, because there is a bit of a requirement for the customer then to provide L2 adjacency for that management cluster, right? That's not a problem we have for workload domains, but because of some of the limitations of the vCenter SDDC manager in terms of its requirement for common L2 and not able to deploy those currently on overlay. Okay, this is something that we've got to ask the customer to provide for us if that's a pattern that you chose for your management cluster. So likewise, then we get into, okay, well, how else can we achieve this? And interestingly enough, we see cases where customers are using vSAN stretch cluster within a data center, not across data centers, but really to avoid having to do any L2 adjacency in their network, avoid having to sort of work through that, but then really what they're just trying to do is achieve the level of availability that is consistent with their requirements, of course, but we also see this in cases where people are having large-scale management domains, right, for large-scale workload, and what they really want to do is have enough capacity to not only expand their ops instance, for instance, and then whatever else that they need to run as second or third party components within their stack. They've got the ability to protect all of that in the event of failure. We do see that in those cases, and of course is an extremely popular topology in European region. And then of course we've got DR scenario, right, where you're talking about using a stretched L2 segment between 2 environments where, again, you're talking about higher latencies. This is more of your region to region or cross region context. That's another way to achieve, sort of availability and resiliency for a management domain. This is disaster recovery versus disaster avoidance, right? So, all right. So what else are we introducing here? There's some work on the way right now. We've been talking with the vSphere IS control plane team. They want us to add vSphere zones into what we've got in terms of the patterns here. This will come here as part of the design guide documentation for VCF, and obviously it's already supported in VCF as a product today. We just want to surface this so people just become aware, right? Looking at the content and saying, hey, oh, we know we can go deploy this from a workload domain standpoint. And of course, from a VCF9 standpoint or a consolidated deployment standpoint, we also have to look at some of these vSphere zone constructs as something we need to potentially surface there, or how we support those from a single instance or single zone kind of context. So this is some stuff that's coming soon, but just to give you an example of how we're really trying to combine different patterns depending on the purpose of a given cluster, right? Ultimately into a validated construct, right? All of these being tested, release to release, update, release to release, and evolve, release to release. And really, the reason we're able to do this now is because we've restructured how we do all this work, right? We're much more efficient in how we can deploy the different topologies and test them and make sure that they're also ready for all the validated solutions that we've built on top of these. But even in terms of how we prepare our documentation for consumption, both for customers doing it themselves, for our partners or our own services division, we found a way with our back-end tool chain to say, okay, let's build a design library, right? Design library covers everything that is possible within all of the patterns, and we cover each of the patterns within that design library. Then the framework is really tying this into, okay, what are we doing from a topology perspective? And so if we're presenting a topology, we want to then say, okay, these are the relevant patterns for that topology, because some don't apply, right? And then if we're talking about an interface, really what we're trying to do there is we're trying to say, we want to help you discover, find, what is the right set of patterns for your use cases, for your data centers. And that's the next sort of thing for us that we're working on, is how do we make this as simple as possible for you to work through and discover what it is that you need as you're building out your private cloud. Jerry?
Over to me. Thanks, Chris. Okay, so obviously that's all about the infrastructure, the foundational layers. Let's talk about validated solutions. So what are they? So they're use case driven, validated technical solutions that we could rapidly implement for customers with VCF. So what does that really mean? So fundamentally, everything we do is built on top of VCF. So Chris has talked about certain topologies. So we talked about the single site, single AZ, multi-site scenarios. Each one of the VVSs supports the topologies that we have today. As we move forward, we'll obviously continue to evolve the solutions where we need to and then support new topologies. Again, reduce time to value. There's some consistency here, right, between what we do, between validated designs and solutions. Ultimately, we want you guys to be able to implement these capabilities in your environment fastest time possible so you can start to really realize value. I'm a firm believer of just installing our stuff doesn't return value back to your business. It's how you then consume it. A key part of what we do here is around the repeatability, right? So consistent architecture, consistent design, prescriptive in nature, that you can follow time and time again and get the same outcome. Each solution is built in a way that it's efficient and scalable, and we deliver operational aspects. There's also the security aspect. So as Chris mentioned, for the validated design, security ready. So that's a very conscious piece. And in fact, if you're familiar with the old validated design solutions and you've looked at one of these, you will see the DNA of what we did in the VVD in the old days has followed through into each one of these solutions. So what's available? I'm not going to talk through this slide too much because this is a sort of a summary, but what I'm going to do is walk through each solution one by one, just to give you an idea of what it is we have and why it's there. But there's a few things to call out from here is each one of the solutions has a very consistent look and feel in terms of the documentation that we produce. So there's design objectives, right? Every single one has clear objectives as to what we're building. There's design, detailed design with design decisions. We follow the same methodology that we used back in the VVD days of a design decision with justification and then the implications relating to that decision. Automation, and this has been a big thing for our team. We wanted to make sure that what we build isn't just a UI clickety-click type approach. We really felt that driving automation for what we deliver added value. Now, this is inherent into what we used to do with the VVD, because ironically, the VMware Cloud Builder that we use today for VCF used to automate the full validated design stack from vSphere all the way up to disaster recovery. So we felt we owed it to our community that we had automation once for some of this stuff. We want to build it again. And of course, the key thing here is all of this stuff is delivered zero cost. So everything we do is available for you to use today or tomorrow, if you feel like doing it tomorrow, simply by going and following the documentation that exists on the docs website. So let's take a look at the first solution, identity and access management. What is it? Ultimately, this is around how would you configure role-based access control through AD integration. So this has gone through a few evolutions over the last 6 to 12 months. We used to use Workspace ONE at the infrastructure layer. That's now simply been removed. And what we've done is we've actually implemented this through Active Directory over LDAP. This is an interesting focal point. There's a lot of work that we have to do today with VCF in terms of delivering a consistent authentication model, which then layers into the other solutions. And you'll have seen probably from some of the sessions this week and the announcements of the unification of introducing more of a VID broker, so a virtual identity broker, where we'll start to be able to integrate into things like Okta, Ping, AD, ADFS, etc. Next up is developer-ready infrastructure. This essentially is the IaaS control plane. This is how do you deploy the Tanzu environment on top of VCF, the extra steps that you need to follow. Has anyone tried to install Tanzu on VCF? Easy to follow. All the steps there guides you fully, doesn't it? Every step of the way, you know exactly what to do. Not so much. So with this solution, what we've done is we've tried to fill in all the holes, all the gaps. What we try to do is take you on that end-to-end journey, help you be successful. By following this solution, you effectively end up with a fully operational Tanzu platform. Health reporting and monitoring. I don't think we asked the question. How many people here have actually got VCF running today? Okay. Yeah. How many people love the dashboard you get from SDC Manager around its health? It was a trick question, exactly. It really was a trick question. There aren't any. So our team is uniquely based in as much as we interact with a lot of our strategic accounts, strategic customers. We have a lot of customer conversations. Events like this are really valuable. Customer advisor boards, etc. One of the things that we look to do as a team is look for gaps. Right? We look for the gaps that our customers are crying out about, and we look for opportunity to see if something that we can do to help fix that, at least short term. Obviously, the gaps get fed back to product management, but it takes time for them to then prioritize and then drive into the product. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this one because I think this is a really powerful story. What we did, we actually had a requirement come in from a customer where they were doing upgrades and they had over 100-page runbook of the things they used to do before they did an upgrade. And they said to us, we have 80 instances of VCF. Doing this upgrade is painful. We have 100 pages we have to go through every time. Can you do anything for us to help reduce that runbook? And can you do it in an automated fashion? So a colleague of mine and myself, we've been doing a lot of PowerShell automation. So the automation I talked about for each of these solutions is done through PowerShell. And I'll come on to the open source projects at the end. But we basically decided to have a look to see if we could do something by creating some kind of reporting mechanism. So what we did was we created a dedicated PowerShell module which allows you to generate snapshot in time HTML reports of the health of the environment. And what it does is essentially it runs the SOS tool, which is a command line tool built into SDC Manager, which allows you to find out whether you've got any health issues. It's not the greatest of tools to use from a user experience perspective, but it has a lot of information. So what we did was we wrote this module. It takes the SOS data via the API requests, extracts the JSON output, and then generates an HTML report for you. So you can get a list of any issues you have in your environment at that point in time. And this got us thinking about, wouldn't it be good if I could take that same data and have a dashboard in VROPS? to give me the health of the environment. Use the tools you have to get a greater visibility. So another part of our team started to look at being able to create the custom dashboards, and we ended up creating this Python module. So by installing a Python module onto a dedicated Linux box, setting up a cron job, it executes the SOS health on the time schedule, takes the data, and then injects it into the dashboard as metrics for VROPs. So now we were able to expose things like password management, certificates being expired, which was some of the issues that we had reported by our customers. And the good news is our engineering teams and PMs took note, and they've started to build that in. So the latest release of 5.2 and 8.18, you'll see there's more health information is now natively built into the management pack that's used for VCF. So it's a good example how us working with our customers, identifying gaps, have been able to drive change into the product long term. So if you take nothing away from this session other than one thing, it's go look at this. If you've got VCF and you want some health data, I really think this is a powerful piece of solution to actually go and look at. So next, intelligent login analytics. So actually one thing to call out is each one of the solutions, we didn't name after a product or a component. And that was deliberate. We wanted to define them more as capabilities. So you'll see intelligent login analytics. I bet as many people in the audience can guess what you're actually installing, right, based on that definition. But essentially, this is about deploying ARIA operations for logs in your environment. And you'll see from the picture, all these diagrams, by the way, are in the documentation. So great you're taking photos, but you can save by just going and look at the docs if you want. This is about installing a centralized log management for VCF. How do you then integrate it? How do you make sure you're connecting all of the other components in the stack to send the logs to log management? And you'll see from the picture that we talk about here as there's an instance A and instance B. So as I said before, everything that we've done is around those topologies in terms of multi-site capabilities. What are we doing for time? Intelligent ops. So this is about providing that centralized monitoring capacity management capability. So taking our operations, deploying that within the environment, and then again, all of the integration points. What do we need to configure? How do we need to configure it? What service accounts do we need to hook in all these components? So we've got clear auditing trailability for each one of the solutions. Intelligent network visibility. So this solution's fairly new. I'm trying to think when we released it. Probably
October.
Yeah, it's fairly new, and it's something that we've been looking to do for a long time. So this is all around ARIA operations for networks. I have to keep thinking about the names. We keep changing names, and trying to keep up is hard. So this is really about implementing our operations for networks, how you would deploy that into the environment, what the collectors are that you need, how you'd place those collectors to be able to pull the data in. Private cloud automation. All about leveraging ARIA automation, how you deploy a self-service catalog, how you drive that into the business, be able to do configuration, placing the objects, placing the various components, and integrating with networking, how you would actually configure that and set it up. Site protection and DR. So this is all about disaster recovery. It actually supports both disaster recovery of the management domain, and that's really the primary use case that we were driving originally when we built this. How do I protect those components that will sit inside my primary site that will need to be consumed during a failover? So that really comes down to the ARIA products in terms of operations, automation, VLCM, and also the Workspace ONE access. There's certain aspects of the platform we deem to be specific to that site, so we're not looking to fail over things like vCenter or NSX or even login site, because the login site architecture that we have is around deploying 2 separate instances. And then, as I say, we've extended this solution to now include what you would need to do for a workload domain. Now, obviously, we don't go down into the application layer because, of course, each application is going to be unique to you and your business, and you need to understand your own applications and what you need to do from a disaster scenario. but at least we give you the kind of the guidance of how to get the infrastructure stood up, configured, and ready to go.
Hey, Gary, I'll pause you there for a sec.
Yep.
Show of hands, how many people are dealing with disaster recovery use case for their environments? It's a good number.
Keep going.
Okay. Well, yeah. So that's a big factor for us, right? We've always kind of designed for that objective for any cloud that's being deployed, right? Is to say, look, if you're really talking about regional availability of your cloud, that means your automation operations layer need to be available also, right? So what's the point of having your cloud if somebody can't access it when there is a data center failure event or even just of the management domain itself? So that continues to be something that our team drives home with our product management team as we're making changes to the product, as we're developing new versions. We're saying, look, we've got to make sure that this use case is solid because it really does matter to a lot of our customers. And we know 60% or better of all of our customers are operating with multi-data center. Now, whether they all have DR requirement or not, we've got to make sure we continue to design our products to work in those kind of consumption models.
Cool. Okay, so with that, the solutions that I've discussed so far are all based on-prem, right? Okay. Now, obviously, there is a shift in focus, but we do have a couple of solutions which we define as cloud-based. So the first one is all around ransomware recovery. It's critical for companies that need to address this. So this is why we've produced the cloud-based solution. It utilizes VMware Live Cyber Recovery, formerly known as a VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery. So this helps build that isolated environment in the cloud for when you have a disaster event, you can recover your VMs and then do the analysis to find out where intrusion was hit. And then finally, in fact, not finally, because we have got another one, which I keep forgetting about. And then we have cross-cloud mobility. So this kind of started out, we had a AWS focus, right, until recently. And so this solution was really about showing how you would build and deploy HCX. The focus was using AWS and VMCA as the sort of the center of the universe from a VM mobility point of view, showing how that you could migrate VMs from on-prem to the cloud and then backwards again.
Question. Why not ask questions, right?
Sure.
So obviously we're looking at what we're going to do in terms of presenting these kind of solutions for on-prem, right? Certainly ransomware recovery is one that we're working on. We've got obviously going to be mobility, leveraging HCX and other means for moving workload between regions or data centers. How many, by show of hands, how many of the folks in this room would be interested in seeing those solutions worked with some of our other cloud provider partners, where they're presenting a ransomware recovery space that you can replicate into, or they're presenting you need on-demand capacity because you've got something that happens infrequently, but you don't want to have that hardware just sitting idle all the time in your own data center. Interest in those solutions still from a cloud consumption perspective.
Okay.
You're saying other than AWS, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, Azure?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, good.
In fact, I'm going to ask another question because you've just jogged my memory. How many people here is ransomware an issue for? Okay, not too many. Okay, and those that it is a concern, what about an on-prem ransomware recovery solution? If you had your own isolated environment, is that more desirable than having it in the cloud? Yeah, a few heads nodding. Okay.
What about smoking hole recovery? Not necessarily disaster recovery, but if something really, really bad happened, I've still got tin and I need to bring my entire environment back to life. Some of you have regulatory requirement for that. Okay, all right, excellent. We do have a solution. It's an operations module that we've released fairly recently.
Okay. Okay, and then last but by no means least, obviously the hot topic last year. Still a hot topic now, but not as hot as last year, that's for sure. We've actually recently released the private AI-ready infrastructure solution. So I'm not going to spend too much detail on that because I think most of us know what that means. But this essentially builds on top of DRI. So the developer, sorry, shouldn't use the acronym.
vSphere IaaS control plane.
vSphere as, yeah, IaaS control plane or the developer-ready infrastructure solution. So what we've done is we take the initial developer-ready infrastructure and then we lay down all of the private AI-ready pieces in order to then deliver on that solution as well. Okay. So open source projects. How many people are aware of the PowerShell modules that are available from VMware for VCF specifically? Hands went up and then hands went down. Okay. I realize this is not particularly easy to read on that screen. I've got to be honest, it's not particularly easy for me to read either, unless I'm right up close. I think I'm getting to that age where glasses are a bit more common theme for me. But as I mentioned before, we as a team are looking for opportunity to help you as a customer, right? So we hear common issues, common concerns. We actually spent quite a bit of time looking through internal service requests, like in terms of customer issues and problems. And as a result, we actually have invested quite heavily in open source projects. And in particular, using PowerShell to drive automation. In terms of automation, raise your hands. How many people actually use PowerShell in their organization? Okay. I've got to do this, otherwise I wouldn't be channeling my inner Ryan.
Ryan would be mad if you don't.
Yeah. How many people use Ansible? Okay. How many people use Terraform? Okay. Fairly even.
Consistent.
Consistent, yeah. So in terms of open source projects, we actually have released a number of dedicated modules for VCF. First and foremost is Power VCF. Have people heard of Power VCF? No. Okay.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay. So Power VCF has been around for probably about 4 years. Yeah. And it was actually a colleague of ours who started off as a bit of a pet project. And the intention was to expose the APIs for VCF in a PowerShell format. So hand cranking functions that, get this, create this, remove this type approach. And that was originally for 3.8. And it was quite limited because, he did it in his spare time, etc. Then we went on the journey 3 years ago now to evolve from what was the validated designs into the validated solutions as they were at the time. And we wanted to drive automation within the solutions. So we started to build a module called Power Validated Solutions. Its sole purpose is to automate the VVSs. And we quickly realized that actually in order to do that, we needed a lot more of the APIs within VCF, so SDC Manager in particular. And so we kind of started working with my colleague Brian to drive Power VCF's capabilities to actually increase the number of APIs that it supported. I forget how many downloads we're on now. It's something like 8,000, 9,000 downloads since it was initially released. So Power VCF was the first module that we released. It is worth pointing out that there is now a native Power CLI module for all of the APIs within SDC Manager, and that's true of a number of the products now. The team from the Power CLI team are starting to use Open API Swagger specs to auto-generate the cmdlets. The downside with that is you don't get your quite common, easy to follow get, new, remove type functions. It really depends what the engineering team decided to call the ID of the actual task. That makes it quite difficult to actually consume, in my own personal opinion, but at least it gives you 100% API coverage every time we do a release of the product. Next, the reporting module, which I kind of already mentioned around the health reporting and monitoring. So we've got the reporting module, which allows to drive those HTML reports. What else have we got on here? Certificate management. So a common theme for the last 2 years, at least,
Longer than that.
is, hey, I've got VCF, I've deployed, but I didn't have signed certs on my ESXi host before I started. But I now want signed certs. How do I do that? And the answer is rebuild still. So what we did was we actually created a module which helps you do the cert replacement on the ESXi hosts with the environment still up and running. I think we're looking to make enhancements there over time, but at least it filled a hole for requests that we were getting for a lot of customers. Password management. How many people have needed to apply consistent policies across all of the components in the VCF environment? One hand, for password expiration, complexity, and account lockout. How many people that need to do that found it easy? Not a single hand. And it's not. And we use different terminology for different components, and the documentation is not 100% complete. It is hard. So what we did was we actually built a password policy manager module. And the idea is that we now allow you to, report on your password policies across all the components. So we normalize it to expiration, account lockout, and complexity. So we talk the same language regardless of the product. We will then give you an HTML report which shows you what your policies are. We then give you the ability to create a JSON file which by default has the default values. You can then go in, you can make configuration changes, set your password expiration dates for each product, then run it again against the environment and do the configuration. And then you can keep running the report in a drift mode, so if someone was to go and change it, you actually can see on the HTML report that something's changed. And we feel that's a really powerful story. What are we doing for time? And power management. How many people regularly need to shut down their VCF stack and power it back on again? No one here? Okay. We have a number of customers that do need to do this. They might be defense type customers. And so one of the challenges is if you have all of the components, you need to shut things down in the right order. You need to bring them up in the right order. It is documented, and in fact, we've documented it ourselves many times. Yep. But we decided that we should put some automation around that. So rather than it being an hour's manual task, we've now got some ability to do that through automation.
Yeah, think about edge use cases there too, right? Like you've got an instance, multiple instances out running, and you're worried about, hey, power went out there, and how long have I got before my UPS is going to run out, and when do I have to hit the go on, let's shut this all down gracefully before we run out of time. That's another example of where this kind of use case, we see a lot of interest amongst customers.
Okay, and then the last one on this list is a bundle management. So this is more of a script than a module, but the offline bundle tool isn't as intuitive or easy to use. User experience isn't great. So we wrote a script that improves on that process through a menu-driven approach to allow it to make life a bit easier to download bundles, etc. And that's it on the open source projects, and we're getting close to time as well, which is just as well that that's the end of the presentation. So I guess, anyone got any questions? If you have, could you come to the mics as well? If you haven't, then we've done our job.
All right. Thank you all for coming.